am Spock, a product of Spock, a product of Homer Simpson, 2 George Bushes, and a variety of other things outside and in between. Aside from that, I am a child of my mother and father. DNA. They have parents, all the way back to chimpanzees and bonobos. So really, I am kind of a product, like you, of evolution. In fact, we can trace it all the way back, even before these amoeba. I am the child of that. And basically, 2 of them got together and banged their way up the evolutionary ladder to make a crazy guy. So, I don't know what I am. I know that I'm me. I'm Logan Fulcher. And today, I'll be talking to you about collage, visual DJing is a thing, and meta Gestalt art. So to begin, I will give you just a brief history of collage, what collage is. I'm going to show you some examples, and then I'm going to tell you, or at least try to tell you, why you should care about it. So to begin, we have 2 gentlemen here. Does anyone recognize this man here on the left? Woo! Picasso, I got it twice, 100 points for each of you. 1,000 points for the person on the right. 10,000 points, that is correct. An old Indiana Jones, maybe his cousin. This is Georges Braque. Georges Barque. My French pronunciation is awful, please forgive me, but Georges Barque. And any French speakers?
Georges Braque.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, I'm going to butcher that for the rest of the talk, please forgive me. These 2 gentlemen are often accredited with being the first collage artists. However, that is not true. To find the first collages, we actually have to go back to the 10th century in Japan. Right here, collage started in this country. And it started with courtly calligraphers, nameless artists who wrote down poetry on something like this. Kind of collage, but mostly for the intent of just holding poetry, right? And after this, the collage moved into Europe around the 13th century, where people started adorning artwork with jewels, gems, gold leaf. But again, it wasn't doing collage, it was just sort of adding to something that was already there. And then finally, many, many years later, in the late 1700s, we get this lovely woman, Mary Delaney, who has led an interesting life. If you're really curious to read something that should be a movie, check out Mary Delaney. In her later years, from the age of 71 to 88, she pumped out nearly 1,000 of these floral collages made from tissue paper that she hand-colored herself. They were very popular among the aristocratic, high society people, but it was considered more of a handicraft than a true fine art form, right? After this, the camera was invented in 1810, 1820, somewhere in there, and collage again kind of became a villain. People were wondering about the truthfulness of photography. When you take a picture, does it really depict what actually happened? What was actually in the place? Some of the people in the dark room were very, very skilled and were able to edit people out, put people in, change the place. That's a form of collage. So even back before Georges Barque and Picasso, collage was a thing. And even still today, people are doing this pre-Photoshop. Right? Jerry Uelsman. That's not me. Jerry Uelsman does some dark room magic. None of this is Photoshopped. And anyone who's been in a dark room or worked with a camera will know how hard this is to make in a dark room. It's incredibly skilled, masterful work. This is called Colorado Rock, though I won't hit you with too many titles or dates today. Okay? Beautiful, right? Back to Picasso and back to Barque. So this is one of the first collages in 1912 by Barque. So basically it has some wood grain and some paper laid in with a drawing. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this. I don't know if I'd put it on my wall, but it's important. And the reason it's important is because Picasso and Georges Barque transformed collage from arts and craft for old ladies and turned it into a fine art form that went just as well on a gallery wall next to a painting or next to a sculpture. It really sort of changed everything. By including garbage, newspaper clippings, magazines into their artwork, they were able to create these new juxtapositions, something simultaneously hilarious but also biting and political at the same time. This is a work from Picasso around the same period, and again, you don't have to love it, but it changed things. What it did was it shifted the focus from the finished art form, and there were thousands of years of this where people looked at the painting, they appreciated the painting. It shifted the importance over to the process and to the medium. What are they using to make the art? Who made it? How did they make it? This question changed everything in the fine art world in ways that had never happened for thousands and thousands of years. And it led us to things like this. Sideways urinal. This is Duchamp. I don't know. A urinal, right? Is that artwork? A pile of candy in a corner. Not my favorite artwork, but it's art, apparently. Yeah, I know. Crazy, right? And even to something a bit more iconic that many of us can recognize, like Banksy. So let me give you some more examples. What can collage be? Jane Frank, collage with wood. There's stoned and sand. It's not just paper. This should be recognizable to hopefully anyone that hasn't lived under a rock. But this is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover. And as you can see, there are a lot of famous faces in the background. Pop culture injected into the art form, re-injected back into pop culture. So at this point in the 60s, 70s, collage was normal. It was a daily thing. You saw it on album covers. Mark Wagner, who is one of the collage giants of our time right now, does work using currency, clearly. He uses dollar bills strictly. And obviously, I think we have Obama and Romney. Can you recognize those guys? But before we even think about who's depicted here, let's think about the medium. Dollars. Number one, it's illegal to cut up a dollar bill, right? Do not destroy legal tender. Number two, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you think of money? Politics, power, control, the haves and the have-nots. All of this comes to mind before we get a finished image, and then you attach that meaning of the dollar to these two. That's the power of collage. Mike Alcantara, who I really like, I do comic book collage as well. This is made out of comic books. Really kind of came into the public spotlight after 9/11. He made a bunch of portraits of the first responders. And the reason that it's different than a painting of a first responder is because he used superheroes to make the first responders, kind of doubling the power of the image. Very, very awesome artist. If you want to check out more, I highly recommend it. Josie Lewis is an example of how collage can be three-dimensional. She suspends her pieces in a completely transparent resin, creating these otherworldly, I don't even know what this is, but it's beautiful. And I wish I could have shown some others of hers because they are mind-blowing. They make me jealous. Patrick Bremer is a personal favorite of mine. He works out of the UK and was a painter who decided to change over to collage. And as you can see, the pieces he uses, those are all magazine, are brushstroke-like. And he creates these very suggestive, deep portraits. So if you're into this kind of art, definitely check out Patrick Bremer. I'm going to destroy this name. I apologize if they're watching on YouTube. Pariwat E Nantan China. I'm not sure, but amazing artist. This is an example of photo montage where we're slicing up photographs that the artist took, recombining them to make something that again could stand on a gallery wall next to a famous painting or next to a sculpture and hold its own, creating this kind of hustling, bustling, overwhelming, powerful cityscape of the mind. This is a kindred spirit of mine, Christian Collins. Hi, Christian. And we don't really have a word for this type of collage, though I've decided to deem it hyper-collage because of the vast number of pieces that get used in these collages. And also something that I've coined objectual integrity. When you look really, really closely, and I know it's hard in the back, every little piece maintains its original structure. You can recognize tiny little people. I mean, you can even see that guy's junk. So there's details everywhere. You can spend a lot of time looking at it. Unlike a lot of artwork in a gallery where people buzz by and spend 5 seconds with something, you can stare at this for 10 minutes and still be finding new things every time you look at it. Delcia Guiron is one of the surrealist collage artists. This is quite a popular style among collage artists, creating these dreamscapes where your mind can create a narrative, and almost kind of in the vein of Salvador Dali. It's quite amazing. You can find quite a good variety of artists who work like this in the collage form. Giricollar. Cubomania is the subgenre here. I don't know if I need to explain why it's called Cubomania, but it's well, look at it, right? It's amazing. Now, I'm going to try this. I have a sound collage. Earlier it sounded like a train wreck hitting a moose, but we're going to try and do this. I might go quickly through it. This is Water Magic, an artist out of Los Angeles, and she makes some really psychedelic blends of sound. Silence. That's not it. Yeah, sure. Overwhelming. It's really powerful, but if you get a chance, look up Water Magic. She deserves way more attention than she gets. This is an example of digital collage and is one of mine. Looks like a castle on top of a mountain, sort of a colorful psychedelic landscape. However, that is not a castle. That is not a mountain. The castle is made out of dildos, rockets, Shinkansen, Chris Farley, cigarettes, goose heads, and more. None of it is real castle. We've got Brad Pitt with his face on his chest and stomach, panini sandwiches, more dildos, snakes, statues, my face, all sorts of things in there. It's almost like a Where's Waldo, right, where you can spend a lot of time looking at it. And indeed, if you look really closely, Waldo's perverted cousin Wadlow is in there, exposing himself inappropriately. This one is a portrait of someone who is in the audience today. Eli, say hi. There's Eli. Okay. He is the author of Cash Crash Jubilee. If you haven't read it, please buy it. It is so amazing, unless you're stupid. Very, very good book series. If you look at his eye really closely, there's an apple, there's a pear, there's a horse head, Spider-Man's arm, tons and tons of detail, again, with objectual integrity where you can start to recognize all the little pieces. The next one, if you have any children, you may not want to look at this. If you are averse to sexual graphic imagery, please do not look. I'll give you 3 seconds. I'm doing this in order to burn the memory of Logan Fulcher into your brain. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. There we go. I heart fuck. I'll let that simmer for a second. And you can look again. Okay? But what does it all mean? Why do you need to care about collage, right? It's just a bunch of little pieces of paper or a couple Photoshop geeks putting some things on Instagram, right? Why does anyone need to care? All right, so you can go ahead and look at me. I don't have any slides for this section. So I showed you a lot of visual art. I gave you an example of a sound collage, but it's in more places than that. It's more than visual and just auditory. You can see it in film. Everyone knows CGI. That could be argued pretty easily as a form of collage. And indeed, there are some artists who splice different films together. Or if you've ever heard of data moshing, it's a form of video collage. It's in architecture. It's in fashion. It's in literature. William Burroughs, does anyone like the Beat Generation? He would, yeah, all right, we got some love in there, okay? He would write his books, slice them up, and reassemble them, creating a non-linear, dream-like, drug-fueled madness that more closely represented his life than just normal writing would. It's in children's book illustration. The Hungry Little Caterpillar, you know that? That is completely collage work. That's collage, right? So the last example would be music, and that's probably even bigger than the visual one. Anyone who likes hip-hop or EDM or techno, mixing records together is just pure collage. Beat sampling. People have been using the same beats for decades now and reusing them and getting sued for it, right? It's a legal battle at this point over the right to collage music. But these are all just kind of concrete examples. I think there's more to it than that. Why should you care about those examples? And why does it matter? The truth is, the reason collage matters, I have no idea. I racked my brain trying to come up with a good answer to tell all of you, something magical that you could take home and ponder, and I couldn't come up with anything honest. It all came out as sort of just artsy-fartsy BS. But I spent a lot of time thinking about it, so I'll tell you as far as I got mentally with as much authenticity as I can muster. Collages have been around, I think, since the dawn of humanity. Every time you repeat one of your dad's dad jokes, or you repeat a piece of advice that your mother gave you, every time you quote Seinfeld or quote The Simpsons, when you add a special ingredient to the family recipe that you've had, when you act on some newfound inspiration that you got from looking at something, you're adding a piece. You're adding a piece. So when you reflect on that, and you reflect on who you are, your quirks, and your idiosyncrasies, ask yourself, why are you wearing the clothes you're wearing right now? Why do you like the music you like? Why do you enjoy the movies you enjoy? If you really honestly ask yourself why you are the way you are, you can probably trace all of that back to some event, someone else that influenced you or turned you on to a new idea. None of what we are was created inside of a little microcosm of personality. We didn't decide on any of this. So, it makes you wonder, where does your family, your friends, and your culture end? And where do you begin? Are we all just the same concoctions of slightly different mixtures of DNA, pop culture, and upbringing? Are we reinterpretations of inherited love and reinterpretations of inherited hate? I think that we can find our individuality just beyond the sum of all of these parts that we've been contributed. I think maybe we are all collages, mixes of all the things that came before us. And I want to understand the nature of that medium, to see how passion and fury, logic and unbridled instinct somehow all come together seamlessly, interconnected in this crazy, weird, wacky, unpredictable world. Collage to me is the journey of a million pieces, and tonight has been one of those pieces, a big one. And I'm glad that you all decided to come be a part of it. Thank you. LoganFulcher.com. Logan Fulcher at Gmail. The artist known as Logan Fulcher, Logan Fulcher.
We'll leave that up for your Q&A. I think that's fair. I think promotion for like 5 minutes is fair, right? Shall we open the floor to questions, Amanda?
Yeah. A reminder.
Since we do actually have a 6-year-old in the audience, thank you for the warning.
Yes.
His 6-year-old specifically. Very close, thanks.
I'm glad I didn't burn anything into your memory.
Questions for Logan. Questions, not rambling statements, please. No.
I explained it very thoroughly, I think.
This isn't really a question, it's more of a complaint.
Okay.
Where was Terry Gilliam's cartoons? That's all.
Eli, I know him, he's trying to pester me. I wish I had time for more video, and I actually did prepare a few movies, but I already ran over time. Otherwise, I definitely would have included that. Anyone else?
The floor is open.
Oh,
Any other pedantic questions?
So my question is this: so you talk about in the music industry, it's not necessarily a settled question.
No, it's
whether
not.
you can sample beat. What about why is it okay for visual art then?
it's not. Unfortunately, the law is really ambiguous in regards to using collage images. I mean, Darth Vader, right there, can Disney sue me? Yes, they could. I could fight back. There are a few things on my side, but it's me versus a giant Mickey. So, but probably it's beans to them. They don't care. But if they wanted to, they probably could make a case.
But that's my point though, is that happening in the art? Because we know it's happening with samples. Music industry is quite litigious. Is it happening in the visual arts world?
It is. Actually, in 2013, there was an artist, Jeff Koons, who is a major D-bag. I hate this guy, but he's one of the best-selling artists currently in the world, and he takes banal items, boring things like balloon animals, and turns them into these giant sculptures. Well, he doesn't do it. He pays someone else to do it. And he got sued. I can't remember the details of the case, but he won. He was a Wall Street banker before an artist, so I think he had the funds to defend himself. Also, Barack Obama, the red and blue, do you guys remember that?
The iconic style, the iconic poster style, the Hope.
Yes, the Hope poster. The creator of that got sued for using the original source photograph from the AP News, and he lost. He lost. So you can't use pictures from the news apparently if they don't like it. I hope someone sues me though.
I would like to note. We can get some fun. I know some might cheat. That, by the way, was the shortest question. Both of them were the shortest questions ever in Andrew's history. So I'd like to thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
You're a pedantic man.
Succinct is nice.
One more.
Okay.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
Just to follow, so I have 2 points just to follow up with that. And is artists actually use copyrighted materials on purpose just to be famous?
Oh, I would guess there are quite a few who push the boundaries just for the shock value and thrill value. I haven't done that yet, but I know a collage artist who intentionally uses Mickey Mouse and a lot of famous characters and puts them in unbecoming situations and does it intentionally to try to push corporate buttons. So it does happen.
You got 30 seconds.
Okay. So there's a really cool article a couple of years ago on Times called this cut and paste culture, but not just for visual art, but also for music.
Right.
And I think if someone doesn't appreciate
10 seconds.
art like this, how would you actually try to describe it? Yeah.
Nice.
Sorry. 5 more seconds. Can you ask me?
For a person who actually considered these as cut and paste product, how would you describe it?
Cut and paste like music or for anything? How would I describe it? How would I defend? Okay, there we go. I would read them the last part of my presentation. That they've all been doing it for a long, long time, and that everyone is using part of something else. I mean, the Beatles didn't all just magically make all of that happen. They had their influences. Who did they copy? Everyone copies somebody, and they can't help it. So where do we draw the line? That's a good question.
If anyone would like to have a conversation about IP law, feel free to stick around afterwards.
Yeah, any lawyers? I'll talk to you after this.
Any socialists? Any more questions?
I got one. So, I mean, your stuff's all, I mean, mostly it looks like you're using stuff from your own culture, but can you talk about, what about crossing those boundaries? Because cultural appropriation is kind of a big talking point of an artist as well, and
Yes.
that comes up. So, can I just ask you to make a comment on that of some sort?
About, so yeah, I guess I'm from the United States, and this is pretty American, I guess, using American comic books. But what if I decided to use imported banana leaves from Madagascar and making tribal art? Is that okay? I don't actually know. Would you guys be angry at me if I was doing tribal art with banana leaves? I know an artist who does that, but he's actually from Madagascar. Can he use American comic books? Is it fair? It's a good. I think that topic is a lot bigger than just collage artwork. I'd be happy to talk about it. It's kind of interesting to me sociologically.
Yeah, so do you use any Japanese manga in your work?
I do. This is all Japanese. Crossed a boundary. I'm in trouble. Yeah, I do. I've been in Japan for 8 years, and I don't look Japanese, and I'm definitely not Japanese, and I don't claim to be, but I have an appreciation for it, and I included it. It contrasts nicely with the stark, vivid colors of the American comic books. Unfortunately, the ink tends to run when I cover it with an acrylic seal, so I've stopped using it. But the cultural attribution part, I glazed through very, very easily. I don't mind it. Is anyone offended by my use of manga? Good. Anyone else?
We'll take one or two more. We got the time for it, I assume.
I do have some artwork. I ended an exhibition today. If anyone wants to see it, I'll bring it up to the front after this.
Boss Undercut in the back has a question.
Balls on.
Boss Undercut, get that right.
Okay. Hi.
What originally drew you to collage, and what inspired you to take so much time, spend so much time, because you were so detailed? Like, what pushed you to that point?
That's a really good question. I was questioning that last night as I was kind of recrafting the last part of my presentation. Can you cover her ears again real quick? In high school, I did a lot of psychedelic drugs. And that kind of, okay. You all right? Don't do them.
Do
that
them.
sort of stayed with me. And during that time, I wanted to make something to look at. And I couldn't find exactly what I wanted, so I started pretty poorly, actually, putting collage pieces together. And it just developed over time. There's something sort of meditative about cutting the pieces and placing the pieces. But it's also a compulsion. Maybe I'm a little bit sick, even. But I can't rest until I figure out where the next piece goes. It's like when you have a word on the tip of your tongue and you can't quite remember it and you're trying to get it. It's like that with every piece, and then when it finally gets its home, it's like the last piece of a puzzle has gone in its place, and it just keeps going. If I figure out the meaning, I'll let you know. Follow me on Instagram.
Do we have time for one more question?
Do we get one? One?
You were talking about, like, people can sue you for saying something self-hater in there. What's the difference between that and people who draw, like, fan art?
That's another good question that I wish I could have done probably 20 minutes just on the legality of all this. Yeah, like fan art, fan fiction, reusing characters. Personally, I'm okay with it. I think we should go all to it. Don't corral creativity because some rich person's losing a few dollars over it. If anything, they benefit from it, right? This gets Darth Vader's face in a new context, and I'm not using it rudely. it's a good question. No one really has a good answer for that. The law doesn't have a good answer for that. At least personally, I think if you're an artist, make whatever you want, and if they sue you, it gets your name in the newspaper. So go to town on it. Don't let the law stop you from making something beautiful or something that inspires you or anyone else. But yeah, I need to talk to a lawyer about that apparently.
Unless you have tons of money that can be lost in an instant.
Yes. Anyone watching on YouTube now is welcome to sue me. They can take my shirt. I'm a collage artist, not a Wall Street banker.
All right. Let's call it there. Thank you, Logan. If you have more questions, please stick around. Logan Fulcher.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll bring up some artwork if anyone wants to look at it.
And beakers.
Thank you. That is lovely.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Amanda. You got this.
Get y'all some beakers at the bar.
You're a nice
Get
artist.
y'all some beakers. You are not from the South. Only I am from the South. We're going to take 20 minutes. Folks will be back at 9:05. 9:05. We'll see you in a little bit. Come back at a drink.
go this year, unfortunately. Google follow more about Tokyo, or having me tell more about it at May 12th. Our friends at Space Cafe, right here, Danielle, they're back at Good Heavens on May 15th, talking about, what is it, 3D rocket engines. Cool. That's May 15th. You can also just Google them, Space Cafe, Tokyo, who's this guy? He's going to tell us about his crazy ideas for a second.
Actually, I don't need to play more. Okay, really fast. I am starting a podcast. It's called Experts Go to the Movies. I am currently seeing experts. If you are an expert on a topic and you've gone to see a movie anytime in your life that drove you crazy because it got your area of expertise so completely wrong. I'm not talking about one thing. I'm not talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson and the sky in Titanic being wrong. I'm talking like the whole movie was wrong. Like they screwed up gravity or something. Come talk to me and I will make you famous. And of course you're not guaranteed. But contact me on Twitter, contact me tonight. I am looking for experts. So we need an expert and a comedian, local comedian, and yeah, we'll break down the movie. And it'll be fun. I'll let you know when it actually happens. But in the meantime, if you want to do it with me, talk to me. Cheers.
And I've got to the weather with John.
I think I got this. What? No. Where were we at? Oh, yes. If you are watching these speakers, and after seeing Logan do this, you might think, no, I cannot do better than this. But you can, I promise. I believe in you. If you can do better, or, you know, even mildly around the same level, if you are interested in a topic, you can do 20 minutes on it, slides, or not really. If you're being interesting, that's absolutely fine. Please come and talk to us, talk to me, or actually don't talk to me because I don't like people. Talk to Amanda over there. She's really cool, and she schedules the speakers. She will hook you up with a 20-minute slot. You can talk about whatever the hell you want with significant limitations. But yeah, I believe that will cover it, and I think we're ready for our next speaker if we will swap over them slidesy slides for our friends thing. And here comes the butchering of his name, Albéric. And I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so we're going to put it on the screen and pretend like I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine, sir. Although I might bring your mic up a tiny bit. You're a little quiet. This gentleman here has been living in Japan and teaching French as a second language. Who wrote this bio? For 18 years in Japan, really. But he has now started his teaching career in the U.S., or he did originally, where he was a French assistant for a year in a university in Texas. Currently, he's an associate prof at the U of Tokyo and has a PhD in cognitive semantics, which, is it a joke to say it goes over my head? No, I don't think it is. For the past 3 years, he has been improving his Japanese language skills and conducting research on the Japanese honorific keigo, sonke, kenjo, all that thing. And here comes some nerdy grammar. So, Albéric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm gonna start with just a quick explanation on how I got to do research on the honorifics. It's not because I'm a especially polite individual, as I'm invited to say. I turned up 130 minutes late today. Yeah, just to clear for that. Well, I'm meant to be here, obviously, out of respect for the first speaker. See, it cost me nothing to say that. Still, makes me come down good guy. We'll get back to how I can do that, okay? That's part of my job. It's how we use language to sound better than we actually are. Anyway, how I got to study honorifics. Yes, so I was born and raised in France, okay? I fell in love with English literature, which led me to Texas for a year, and then I started my teaching career there, and finally I got to Japan. And whatever I was doing in the United States stopped working as soon as I landed in Japan, so I went back to school to learn how to be a proper teacher. So I did a master's degree in applied linguistics and finally a PhD in cognitive semantics, which is, by the way, the study of how the human mind processes word meaning. Okay? To keep it simple. Okay, here you go. So, just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So, honorifics. Honorifics. I'm going to start with a few definitions, so you all know what I'm talking about, and a few examples across languages. Okay? I wanted to do all Keigo, but Amanda said no, because not everybody speaks Japanese. So I'm gonna speak about, well, a number of languages you might have heard of, and some you definitely haven't heard of. Anyway, so, and after that, that's the three main aspects of my talk. I'd like to talk about how we feel about honorifics. Mostly how the average speaker feels about them, how the linguist feels about them, and finally, how the teacher usually feels about them. Mostly how the teacher presents them, in the class, and how they should be talking about it. Anyway, here we go. So, you can read as well as me. So, basically, honorifics, it's all about showing deference to somebody, okay? Deference or respect, politeness, or many, many synonyms. Anyway, let's say deference. It's not only about the addressee. It could be somebody related to them, okay? It could be about a special space or place on earth, okay? It's not only about showing respect to the person you're talking to. It could be about their wife, about anything else, really, okay? Some people say that by showing respect, we also encode our social status, okay? That's a bit hard to grasp right now. Let me give you a few quick examples, okay? So you have the Japanese, okay, honorifics really. Japanese polite languages, the Keigo, actually you have three of them, okay? Honorifics is only one of the three, Teinego, which means literally polite language, okay? It's, as linguists call them, addressee honorifics means you're showing respect to the person you're talking to, and that's it. Well, in a nutshell, yes. And you have the French tu and vous distinction. I don't know if you guys studied French in high school or junior high school. No, you didn't. That's perfectly fine. Basically, we have two words that means you. Okay. English used to have it. Used to have you and thou, which is not used anymore, of course. But basically, that's it. Okay. Tu being the informal way, the casual way, and vous the more formal way. It's a reference honorific because it's not only about showing respect to the person you're talking to, but it's also a way to refer to their wife, to their dog, to their kids, or whatever. So, by using that particular form of address, you're actually showing respect to your addressee and the person closely related to him or her. Okay? So that's the difference. So far we have two different kinds of honorifics. Addressee honorifics in Japanese. I'm sure that even if you don't speak Japanese, you've heard the word genki, okay? So if you want to be more polite about it, you say o genki desu ka, okay? The o and the desu ka after the genki means it's teinego. It's a more formal way to go about it. Okay, so those two you might have heard of. Maybe another one. Yeah, this one too, I'm sure. Okay, English. Okay, madam is an honorific. Okay, it's how you address a person of the feminine gender. Okay, and my all-time favorite, the mother-in-law language in the Derible language. Okay, what is Derible? It's a small language in Australia, okay, and it's an honorific that you can only use while talking to or about your in-laws. Okay, and the linguists are so funny people, they call that the mother-in-law language. Actually, it's all about your in-laws, okay, your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, your son-in-law. It's not as funny as it looks. It's actually about the universal taboo of incest. It's about keeping boundaries, okay? So the joke ends there, I'm sorry. Here we go. To keep things simple, I thought it would be a lot easier to keep track of one honorific for tonight, the honorific sir in English, okay? And not only about one honorific, with that particular context, place and time, okay? A student in university raising her hand and, well, calling the teacher, the professor really, and because she wants to ask him a question, okay? Say, excuse me, sir, I have a question, okay? Why does she say sir? Why does she feel that she has to say sir in that particular context, okay? That's the question I'm going to answer, or trying to answer today, okay? If you're following me so far, let's continue. Here we go. Oh, so different approaches. Okay, I'm going to start simple with the, let's say, the average speaker approach to honorifics. Most people, even they realize it or not, they tend to believe that honorifics are here to translate our mental state, or the feelings we have to one another. Okay? It's just like, so using honorific is like calling a little, just taking a little emoji to our speech. Okay? We have the average text we meant to send, and in the end, like, oh, she may not get what I'm saying, so let's oh, smiley face on that, and everything's peachy. Okay, that's the way most of us feel about honorifics. So, talking about the Japanese honorifics, you know, we have the respectful language, you know, the humble and kind language. So those would be my Japanese emojis for Tenego. Okay, I found them and they're very good. I was very happy to find a respectful emoji. It's not easy to find. Okay, and okay. For Japanese speaker out there, that would be Sonkeigo. Okay. Okay. And the humble way is when you lower yourself. Anyway, so the Kenjogo. Anyway, obviously, even though it's, well, pleasing to the eye, it's not very hard science. So more to honorifics than that. But anyway, I think it's a nice approach. Another way we feel about honorifics is the nostalgic approach. I'm sure you've heard of it. Well, the crowd's pretty young here, but I'm sure you've got parents and grandparents, and I'm sure they told you that young people these days, they're not as polite as they used to be. In my time, people were using more honorifics. We used to say sir all the time. We used to be, okay. Socrates said it 2 millennia ago. So apparently it's not a new thing, okay? Yeah, people, every generation speaks worse than the last one. Why is that? Well, and I can answer that particular question with a few items from the linguistic literature, which bring me to the second part of my talk, what or how linguists deal with honorifics. Here it is. Okay, we tend to believe that we're not as polite as we used to be because people confuse absolute politeness with relative politeness. Absolute politeness, it's about the number of linguistic markers pertaining to politeness in your speech. Whether you say thank you, sir, blah, blah, all that. And relative politeness is about the appropriatedness of your speech level to the situation you're dealing with. Okay? And to keep it simple, absolute politeness has decreased. It's a fact. But people are just as polite in relative terms as they used to be. I'm sure it comes as a relief to you, but that's it, okay? Not so true for the Japanese, okay? If I have time, I'd like to elaborate on that. Japanese women especially are more polite now than they used to be. In absolute terms. It's actually less polite in relative terms. Anyway, more of that later if we have time. So, yeah, I'd like to talk about some things that are going to get technical. It's, well, as you know, I did a PhD in cognitive semantics, okay? In cognitive semantics, we try to have a different approach about honorifics and politeness in general. We keep track of the variables we have to take into account when choosing a proper degree of politeness in our speech. Okay, here are the variables. You don't have to memorize all of them, just to give you, an overview of what the linguists are working on. So, you have the distance between you and your addressee. Distance can be vertical or horizontal, okay, depending on whether the person you talk to is a friend, an intimate, your lover, a family member, a complete stranger, and depending on your relative slot on the social ladder, okay? So that's distance, okay? Which is measured along those two axes. You have the propositional content and speech act, what we actually say, okay? Let's say, like, if I want to ask somebody for a favor, it's better if I'm being more polite about it. Whether if I'm just giving them a compliment, oh yes, actually, just good job, it's fine. I'm doing something for them anyway, so I don't have to suck up to them. Sorry for the colloquial term, but it's a lot easier for everybody. And lastly, yes, context, okay? The setting, okay? You don't have to memorize those four variables. They come back later. Actually, now. Here it is. Okay. We have all four variables, okay? And then people come up with a formula, okay? Yes, a formula. Yeah, I see some of you guys are doubting. Yes, a formula. So you've got the weightiness of the FTA. Okay, this gets even trickier. In this particular approach, the strategic approach, every time we speak to somebody, we might potentially be offensive. Okay? Every time we open our mouth to say something, it's a potentially FTA, which is a faith-threatening act. Okay? And we have to diffuse the situation. And how do we diffuse it? Well, we do some math. Okay? So let's say I want to say something. Okay? If it's a request, it's pretty high. Okay, the R value is going to be pretty high because I'm actually I want somebody to do something for me. Okay, so I'm already starting behind. Plus, I have to take into account the distance I mentioned earlier, measured along those two axes, and the power situation we have. Okay, so given all that, let's say that if I want to ask my boss for a raise in a very public context, very formal context, I have to be quite polite because all the decks are stacked up against me. But if I'm paying my kid a compliment at the playground, I don't have to be that polite because well, we're very closely related. It's my kid. I'm their father, so, you know, I have the power over them, I hope. And, well, you know, I'm just giving them a compliment, okay? So you've got both ends of the spectrum right there, okay? It's all I can say about that now. It gets a lot technical because actually there's a flow chart and the different options and alternatives we weigh. Do we want to do the FTA? Do I want to be mean about it? Do I use what's called supporting moves? I mean, there are all kind of strategic choices I have to make to achieve my communication goal. Okay, I'm going to skip that part, and maybe if we have time later, I'll go into detail about it. But okay, pretty much that's all the linguists have to say about politeness in general. Okay, if you're following me, here's the Japanese linguist approach. Okay, why is it Japanese? Okay, now it's not really Japanese, really it's Asian. Chinese and Koreans feel the same. You remember what I said about the strategic approach to politeness, how we want to achieve our communication goals by weighting the variables I mentioned before? Well, it's still true, but on the top of that, there's something else. Most Japanese linguists believe that the way we use honorifics is not about achieve a means to an end, it's not about, you know, getting what we want, is some way, it's a way to position ourselves in the social ladder, okay? It's called social deixis. If you're not familiar with the term deixis, a deictic word, it's a word that only makes sense in context, if you're aware of the context. Like, for example, the words I, you, here, now, only makes sense to you because you know who's talking, when, and where, okay? I, by itself, doesn't mean anything, okay? So it's called a deictic word. Social deixis is a term coined by the Japanese linguist to say that we use, in that instance, keigo, not only because we want to be polite, we want to achieve our goals of that, it's mostly about projecting an image of ourselves as a functioning member of the Japanese society as a whole. Okay? Yes, it's important, especially for women. Before you say anything, why is it important? Because the Japanese women tend to use more keigo than the men, because they have to, that's the thing, and also because it's perceived to be a ladylike fashion way of talking, okay? So by using keigo, by being polite, we show how well-bred we are, okay? And that's part of, you know, what you're trying to do when you speak every day, okay? It's not only about achieving your goal, it's also about, you know, projecting a very positive idea of yourself, positive image of yourself, okay? So keep those two, okay, approaches in mind, because, oh yeah, I forgot to press the button. I wanted to show you how, you know, we position ourselves on the social ladder. Sorry, wrong timing. Here we go. Okay, now it's the part of the talk that I like the least, is because that's how teachers usually talk about keigo and all that. I went to school in Japan. When I first came to Japan, you speak a single word, and well, obviously that proved trying. So I went to school, and I had a number of teachers who drilled me on, well, speaking Japanese, and mostly the keigo. And when it came to keigo, I had this thrown at my face. Oh, sorry, that's a French thing. The French teacher does the same. It's a flow chart, and it gives you 13 different kind of alternatives on how and when you should use tu or vous, depending on the context, the person you're talking to. Okay, okay, for example, you're talking to a teacher. Okay, is he old? Is he young enough to be your son or daughter? If so, then you might be able to say tu. If not, better stick with vous. Okay, a certain alternative like that. Obviously, it's not helpful. It's really not helpful as a teacher because we need to know what's behind all that. Okay, I don't want to have to memorize 13 different, you know, variables to actually get to speak French. Especially since in Japan it's way worse. Japanese keigo wouldn't be 13 variables, it would be about 60 or 80. Okay, if you want to take all the combination of all the variables I mentioned before. So, oh yes, that's the Japanese thing. When I was doing some research for this presentation, looked on the internet, and in Japanese, and I found like most of the information you can find on Keigo is in Japanese, not in English, because most of the Japanese struggle with it too. And they struggle big time actually. The first 6 months they get enrolled in a graduate university, and they start working. They have to learn how to address properly the customer. It's part of the training. It's a big part of the training actually. Okay, so to tell you, they have 3 different kinds of polite languages. There is a respectful kind when you talk the person up, because to tell them how great they are. But if you were to mention something you did yourself, something about you, where you live, all that, then you should lower yourself, indirectly paying them, deference. Okay, keeping in mind that you have to do all that sometimes in the same sentence. And also keep track of the in-group membership thing. Is this related to me? Is this somebody who's in my family? We belong to the same club? But if we belong to the same club, how old is he? Oh, all that, okay? Pretty soon, it's a whole nightmare. Okay. The reason why I got into doing research on honorifics is because ideally, I like to write a textbook about it. Write some, for French or English students, to help them out learning Japanese, okay? Because every time you talk to a teacher, there's something that they never tell you, but they assume that Keigo, or honorifics, any kind of honorifics really, is part of the politeness thing, of course, but it's part of social norms, therefore it's part of the grammar of the language, okay? So they tell you that you want to learn Japanese, well, the grammar, obviously, the adjective, verbs, and all that, and also the culture behind it, okay? Because they will tell you at length, if you don't get the culture, you never speak the language. Be that as it may, linguists slightly disagree in a way that you cannot say that honorifics are like verbal tenses. Like in English, you're talking about what you're going to do this weekend. Okay, that's future, so I use the future tense. Sure, that's convincing enough. Well, but honorifics don't work that way because, and that's the most important thing, we have some room to maneuver, okay? If I want to talk about my weekend, it's going to be very hard for me in English to use the past tense. Really, it's going to be very hard for people to understand that I'm actually talking about tomorrow, okay? But, yeah, obviously. But it's not that simple with honorifics, okay? So, to conclude, it's going to be my last remark. Everything I told you is right, it's true. All the approaches are actually, well, make sense in their own way. But, and that's the most important thing, there is a margin for error. We have some room to maneuver, okay? And mastering this particular comfort zone is the hardest thing you have to do when dealing with honorifics, okay? It's you have to keep in mind the absolute and the relative level of politeness, okay? So my question was, are honorifics always about being polite? Well, it was a trick question, really. Yes, it's always about being polite, but the real question should have been, what does it mean to be polite? Okay? Thank you. Right on time.
Oh, you got fancy and you made a Q&A slide. That's extra. Yes. That's extra. I learned that term recently from young people. Are you ready for questions? We got one. Yeah, Rod, go on. I'm timing you, Rod.
Hi.
Hi, good evening.
Can I ask a question? Or may I ask a question, please?
Go ahead.
So, you talked about language in terms of words, or at least parts of words and grammatic constructs, right? How about how you actually speak and your personal appearance, your clothing, your body language, your grooming?
Of course,
how does it all fit together?
It all plays a part, obviously. It all plays a part. I'm a linguist, I'm not a behaviorist, so I don't work on that. Okay, I choose not to do research on that, but it does play a part. Especially in language, in Japanese, because the way you carry yourself, especially when you say hello, you know that you have to bend at the waist, right? According to Bertocchi too, it's 30, 40, or 60 degrees. Yes, studies have been shown, yeah. So, yeah, it plays a part. Yeah, it obviously plays a part, and it comes to account. But in Japanese, I have to say, in Japan, sorry, the way, because, well, especially businessmen tend to dress pretty much the same. So that does not really register so much. The way to speak is actually a lot more important, I think, when it comes to business anyway. Okay? But I haven't done any particular research on that particular subject, so I can't answer you more on that.
Well, I can also give you an idea to not wear your royal blue suit to a to a group interview. I have not made that mistake ever in my life, I promise. Next question.
I guess Logan and then Elon.
So if Japanese and Korean and
Chinese.
and Chinese have these very high levels of honorifics and politeness, is there anything on the opposite spectrum where people just don't say please, they don't say sir or thank you or ma'am or anything?
Oh, let me introduce you to this wonderful language called Finnish. We have no words for any of those things.
Yeah. And honorifics are only a small part of the linguistic markers for politeness. And Japanese is not the most polite language on earth. Last are Tibetan. I mean, in terms of absolute terms, in terms of numbers of honorifics. I'm not saying that the Tibetans are more nicer, more polite people. That wouldn't mean anything. But in terms of number of honorifics, yeah. Because they have honorifics that's related to the place they're talking about. When they find themselves in a temple, doesn't matter what they might be talking about, they have to use a particular language that's only used when in that particular temple and all that. Okay? And, well, once again, honorifics are only one part of the linguistic markers we have. Like the propositional content. Let's say I want you to open the window because I'm hot or cold. Okay? So could you please, sir, open the window? Okay? I'm being polite. You might say, oh no, I'm cold as this. Sorry, sir. You can be very polite to me, yet being very offensive. So it's not only about how we say it, it's also about what we say. Okay? Keep in mind that politeness always also plays a part on that. You're welcome. Sorry, I really meant to be here for your speech. I just got the time wrong. Somebody here?
Yeah, sure.
So Japan often ranks very low on gender equality, according to different international organizations that rate these sorts of things. And so I'm wondering if you think that the amount of keigo honorifics that Japanese women use in Japanese society has any relation to that. And if you do think so, do you think that you were talking about how it can be considered a sign of good breeding? So do you think that the pressure to use keigo to express good breeding may contribute to the gender equality, or is it the other way around?
Wow. It's a lot of questions in one.
He fit the 45. Okay. He fit it. It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
I'm a linguist. Okay, so whatever I say doesn't come from my reading on gender studies. Okay, it's my personal opinion as a linguist. Okay, I don't think gender equality has anything to do with the way we speak. I think that people are waging a war on words. It's not the words that are, the guilty parties. Okay, just because women are expecting to behave a certain way doesn't mean that they actually rate lower on the social ladder. Okay, I think it's if women are expecting to behave a certain way, well, surely they have to use more honorifics. Okay, but I don't think it's not a problem. I think if there is a problem, because I don't want to sound too ethnocentrist about it, if there is a problem of gender equality in Japan, it's not the language fault. The language is what people made of it, okay? You don't wage a war on the language, you wage a war on the ideas behind the language. And also, Japan has become a more egalitarian society, and the overall use of keigo has decreased over the years, except for the women. The women speak more, but that's because they look at it's an oversimplification of a staggering degree, but they look at it as a way to get men, because it makes them look good. Okay, to behave in a properly ladylike fashion. It's like raising your little finger when you're having tea. Okay, it's just what it is. So much so that actually women are actually using it wrong. Some women. They use honorifics when they refer to their own wallet or saifu. That's not supposed to be used today. Exactly, but you're talking up your saifu, your wallet.
I'd like to interject. Yes, I've been watching you for the last minute. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So I'm a physicist by background, but I've done a lot of sociolinguistics research.
Okay, good.
So I was just wondering, when you say that the social context has nothing to do with linguistics, but sociolinguistics is a field that addresses just that.
Yeah, but we're talking about I was talking about absolute politeness.
Okay, so then I have a question then on absolute politeness. So you were saying that the use of an honorific would be a symbol of absolute politeness, correct? Or maybe?
Partly. Politeness is being rated on the use of honorifics, and honorifics are only a part of Keigo. Huh?
Okay, so
no, keep that in mind. Huh? It's only a part of Keigo. There are a lot more things that comes to play.
Okay, so perhaps taking an English example, because I'm a native English speaker, whenever someone says ma'am or miss to me, it's usually a male speaker, and it's almost always condescending when they're saying it. So I don't really feel like they're being polite or honoring me when they use that language. So, and of course, a lot of that has to do with sarcasm and context and the tone of voice, things like that. So to me, I think there's definitely lots of space in which an honorific could be used where it's really the opposite meaning that they're intending. But then I also would just say that I disagree with you when you say that the social context does not have to do with the language, because language is an artifact of like the social things that we make.
Language comes from social context. The language is not the cause. That's what I'm saying. The language comes from what people.
Right, but the language reinforces it.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
45 seconds.
Exactly.
But thank you.
Actually, that was my favorite.
Yeah, just quick. I like to elaborate on that. Like people say, when you students say the N-word because it's a racial slur. People can be just as racist as they want and never say the word. Okay, so it doesn't change the idea. You just change the way they relate to their language. You don't change the way people think just by banning one word. That's what I'm saying.
I'd like to disagree with that, but I'm not going to because we don't have that kind of time. Where are we at?
So it's just a technical question. I've learned Japanese with 5 different kind of keigos, including bikago and teichogo, which is beautification and neutral florification. And did you extract those on purpose because they are non-relational in a way, or did you just?
Oh well, that's a good question. To be totally honest with you, I never studied Japanese in university. I'm studying it now. To be totally honest, I have the level 2 of Nihongo no Kushike, so it's not that high. Okay, I'm not. I do okay, but I'm not fluent in any way, shape, or form. So the reason why I excluded them is because I wanted to keep things simple, obviously.
Okay, so
Sorry, who's talking? Oh, sorry.
me.
Sorry.
I work in IT, and I've been in several natural language processing projects. So knowing that, it's very difficult, for example, to develop. I've heard. So in English, it's let's say like that. There's a fairly mature model about detection of emotion and about semantic analysis representing a certain tone. To which degree does, and that's interestingly referring to the statement of the lady like that, semantic analysis in a way that it detects and does an interpretation of tone flow into your analysis of politeness? Plus, did you study other dimensions than politeness? Because politeness, to a certain degree, is also subject to interpretation, in my humble opinion.
Okay. No, obviously. So that's why the relative politeness is the trickiest part, really. Like it's all about context and For example, you can be little polite, and you can be too polite too, and then you're in sarcasm or you're being ironic. To answer your first question, I didn't study any of that. I'm come from the study of words, so I stick to what I knew. Oh, I thought I knew. So I cannot answer your question regarding tone. I know it plays a big part. There are studies being done on that, but I haven't read any. But you had a second part of your question? No? Was it? Oh, no, okay. One more question.
Last one.
Thank you. I love your respect emoji.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think you know that there are a lot of Japanese people are crazy about using lines and emojis, and it's easier for us to understand what he or she wants to say. But does it make it difficult for Japanese people to use tenego or kenjo properly?
Because of the emojis you use in their daily use? I have no idea. I never questioned that before. Okay, I know that the way people think that whenever they speak Japanese, it always has to be polite. But that's one of the criticisms I would have to say to my teachers. They never tell you how actually people speak. And most of the teachers are female teachers, which is fine, which means you never get to use or hear the masculine way of speaking. And that's part of the problem too. I mean, it's part of what language is about, okay? I have two kids who go to Japanese school, and I had some papatomo, and I have no idea what they're talking about. The way they speak, they don't enunciate properly, like the way I've been. They use words like I've never heard before, and the women perfectly understand what they say. But when I'm with the dad's table drinking beer, I have no idea what's going on. And that's part of, because we aren't told that, and that's a problem. Sorry. It's a very personal issue for me, obviously.
Emojis killing stuff since 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
I think we're going to shut it off there. It seems like there's a lot of discussion to be had, and I will encourage you to have that right now for the next, let's say, 20 minutes. Is that cool with you, Amanda? Good. We're going to see you at 10:05. Reminder, if you want to come up and be a speaker yourself, spout your own ideas, whatever makes you happy, come see us, come see her. Go see her. She's over there. I'm not good at grammar. Or is it syntax? I'm not entirely sure. Thank you again, Albéric, very much. We'll see you all back again in 20 minutes. Hi. Okay, so thanks to Gaiax for providing this venue, and thank you all for coming, and we're still doing a thing. I'm not saying goodnight.
We try so hard not to screw up.
We do try so hard, so much. Where were we at? What's the next thing? Are we talking about our next speaker?
Introducing Sarah.
Are we ready for this person? This person who's been standing here waiting for me to actually talk about her is apparently from Texas, from a cool little town called San Antonio, which I just learned and have not read this bio at all. Oh yes, a postdoc fellow at JAXA. Shiny, yes, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. Sorry about that. Aerospace Exploration Agency. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, as well. Where are you? She's here too. Our dear friend from Space Cafe. Her research is generally focused on planetary geology, especially the crustal, I can't read, compositions and development of airless bodies like asteroids, Earth's moon, and the moons of Mars, which are, nobody over here. 2 moons of Mars, anyone? You don't count. Rod, fine. Thanks for backing me up. Rod's always very reliable on answers. She will be describing something with dinosaur memes. I'm not even going to bother. Would you please take this mic over here? Sorry. Sarah Kreitz, everyone. Kreitz? Sarah Kreitz.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here and pretty excited to be the last talk. I assume everyone's well lubricated now, so I'm going to seem really funny. It's already working. So I'm a space scientist, and so I'm here to talk to you about space. Space is a wonderful place, I'm sure you agree. In our solar system, we have incredible gas giants and a variety of moons. We have planet-forming regions and incredible galaxies, mysteries like dark matter. The most beautiful ring system in the universe. We have ocean worlds and my own personal favorite, Earth's moon. Space is a wonderful place, but it's also very dangerous. There's no air in space, of course, so you would suffocate if you were there, but that's not the only problem. Without an atmosphere, if you're facing the sun, you get very hot, and if you're facing away from the sun, you get very cold. The atmosphere helps to regulate surface temperatures on planets that have them. So on the moon, for example, over the course of a lunar day, we go from temperatures hotter than the Sahara Desert to temperatures colder than the coldest temperatures at Earth's poles. The same is true if you're a spacecraft. Heat is one problem, cold is another, but radiation is one of the most terrifying issues that we have in space. Solar flares can destroy your electronics, and they can give you such an acute radiation dose that you could die if you're not treated. And if you manage to escape a solar flare, you're being subjected to a constant low rate of radiation from galactic cosmic rays, which limit total amount of time that humans can spend in space. We also have micrometeorites, which can damage your electronics and your solar panels. And just to get there, you have to strap yourself on top of a giant, what amounts to a giant bomb, and get shaken and rattled until you get to orbit. And that's not even to mention the aliens. Has anyone seen this movie? No one? Okay, one taker. 2, 3. You don't have to be ashamed. So here's another one. I'm here on Friday the 13th, as most of you know. Okay, someone's seen this one. That's good. Friday the 13th is an extremely unlucky day in some superstitions in North America and Europe, which makes it the perfect day to talk about space and all of the things specifically that can go wrong in space with space missions. But it's a Friday night, and we're all just trying to have a good time. This is the last talk, so I'm not going to talk about the really bad disasters that have happened in space. I'm just going to talk about the ones that looked bad for a bit, but then everything worked out in the end, and everyone was happy. I'll leave the bad ones to you to Google yourself. I highly recommend it. So I'll start with this quote by Neil Armstrong, one of the classic people that we know about. And Neil had this really great insight. You've got to expect that things are going to go wrong when you're doing space exploration. And you always have to be prepared for handling the unexpected. Neil knew this from personal experience on the Gemini 8 mission, which I don't have time to talk about, but you should Google that one too. But this is just a fact of life, and you have to be prepared. These are some guys that knew personally all about this. Does anyone recognize them? Nobody? This might help. Okay, so I have some sound to play here. This will, if you haven't already recognized them, this will help. Okay, so this is the crew of Apollo 13. Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes. Or, these are the guys you really know, Bill Paxton, Kevin Bacon, and Tom Hanks. So, of course, we all know the story of Apollo 13. It's one of the most riveting space stories, and it also made a great movie. But this is not the only space mission that has been turned into a fantastic movie. We're in Japan, so I hope at least some of you have seen one of these two movies. Anyone? Nobody? One? Two? Okay. A couple of people. This is actually good because this is what the rest of my talk is about, so I'm glad that you haven't seen it. That would spoil the story. JAXA had an incredible mission called Hayabusa in the early 2000s that actually makes for one of the most riveting robotic spacecraft stories that you could hope to turn into a movie. So Hayabusa's goal was to investigate the mysteries of the birth of the solar system. And what we mean by that is that Hayabusa was going to an asteroid, which are basically leftover building blocks of what the planets are made of. And Hayabusa was not only going to go visit this asteroid called Itokawa, but it was going to descend to the surface, touch down, pick up samples, and bring them back to Earth. So this is an incredibly ambitious mission. It was the first sample return mission from a planetary surface beyond the Earth-Moon system. So of course the Apollo astronauts brought back samples, and the Russian Luna missions brought back samples from the moon as well. But Hayabusa would be the first beyond the moon. Everything started out fine. Hayabusa launched in May of 2003, and it was successful after the usual delays that you expect with all space missions. Shout out to James Webb Space Telescope. But just shortly after launch, Hayabusa was struck down by one of these disasters that I warned you about, a solar flare. A very strong solar flare damaged the solar cells for the Hayabusa satellite, which means that it was able to get less power than was initially planned. And it also lost one of its 4 ion engines, which were going to propel it to its destination. This is okay. Like Neil Armstrong said, you have to be prepared. So Hayabusa was actually designed to run on 3 out of 4 engines. One of them was a backup. But we lost the backup pretty early. So the spacecraft limped along. 300 million kilometers later, it made it to Itokawa, its destination. And it was only actually 6 months late, despite its issues with low power and the loss of 1 engine. September of 2005, it arrived at Itokawa and began a survey of the surface. This is an artist's conception, but that is actually what Itokawa looks like. So the next goal is to actually collect samples from the surface of this asteroid. Now, how do you do that? Of course, we've done it before on the moon, but a tiny asteroid is a very different place from a large planetary surface like the moon. It has very low gravity, very different particle size of regolith. So the spacecraft designers here had to be very creative. And what they came up with is this long sampling arm. So this is the spacecraft, and underneath it is this arm. And the spacecraft is kind of hovering above this arm, and what it actually will do is descend down, touch the sampling horn only to the surface, and as soon as it touches down, this causes a projectile to fire. Basically, a tantalum bullet fires from the spacecraft into the surface of the asteroid to blast off dirt and rocks, just like this, up into the sampling horn, and then those particles just drift up into the sample capsule, which will then be returned to Earth. So this is the idea, never been done before. Okay, November of 2005, survey had been made. It was time to try to collect the first samples. This is an actual image, which is pretty incredible if you ask me. This is the asteroid Itokawa, and this is kind of a Hayabusa selfie. It's taking a picture of its own shadow above the asteroid. And this little white mark is a target marker. It dropped it first in a promising location, and then it tracked it down to land in that place to collect its sample. So it's time to collect the samples. Hayabusa begins to descend nearly all the way to the surface. It thinks it detects a hazard and decides that it's time to abort. Hayabusa is actually empowered to make these decisions on its own because it's far enough away from Earth that the ground just can't be in the loop to help it make decisions. So it thinks it detects a hazard. It decides it's not safe. I need to leave. But it's actually descended too far already. It tries to take off, and it doesn't manage it. And it actually ends up just drifting back down and just bouncing a couple times and coming to rest on the surface of the asteroid, on its sampling horn, and then maybe on a solar panel or the side of the spacecraft. This was never intended. And it's done all of this without any humans in the loop. So back on Earth, everybody's going, what's going on? What's happened with the spacecraft? From the telemetry that they got, they couldn't actually quite tell what had happened. They couldn't tell if it was hovering above the surface or if it had actually landed or if it had missed the asteroid entirely, perhaps. But they knew it wasn't safe. If the spacecraft had actually landed and was sitting on the surface, this was not a safe situation to be in. I told you that a planetary surface facing the sun can heat up to pretty warm temperatures. So our poor little spacecraft is sitting here with the sun shining on it from one side and this hot asteroid heating it up from the backside, and it was never prepared for that kind of heat. So the humans back in mission control debate really quickly what to do, and they decide we're just going to tell it emergency liftoff and hope that it's actually on the surface. It's where we think it is. So they do, and it does manage to lift off to a safe distance, and they actually lose communication with it for just a little while, and everyone's a bit worried, but they regain communication, and we didn't actually manage to fire the sampling bullet as we had planned because the spacecraft turned itself off on the way down, but we'll just close the sample container, tuck that sample container away, and we'll try again. So it's time to try again. This time, we're going to do it right. So Hayabusa's ready to descend, descends, bounces off immediately as planned from the surface back to its safe distance. So this is really promising. Everyone's back home on Earth celebrating and sending out press releases. They're really excited we finally sampled correctly. But tragedy struck. As the spacecraft was lifting off, it suffered a fuel leak in its chemical propulsion. At this point, the spacecraft was actually using its chemical propulsion to control its attitude so that it could face its communication dish towards the Earth and talk to us, because it had already lost some other systems, its reaction wheels, that should have been controlling its attitude. So with the fuel leak, it loses its attitude, loses communication with the Earth, and it was actually almost 2 months before we heard anything from Hayabusa again. This is a very dramatic moment in the movie, and the spacecraft is like, I'm lost. But 2 months later, they do manage to regain communication when the spacecraft has drifted back into a position where it's actually able to point its dish towards Earth. And when I say we, but I was not involved. When the ground control people communicated with it again, they discovered its chemical propulsion system is completely shot. It's lost 4 out of 11 batteries because the spacecraft has been off this whole time because it can't get power. And so it gets extremely cold when it's not able to heat itself up. As I mentioned, it had already lost most of its reaction wheels that help it keep pointed in the right direction. And it's actually lost another ion engine, so it's now down to 2 out of 4. Did we actually collect a sample? We actually don't know, because when the spacecraft took off and all of these issues happened and it shut down, it lost its memory of that event. So we still don't know, do we have a sample or not? It's January of 2006. We plan to depart in December of 2005 to return to Earth. We finally make contact, but it's clear the spacecraft is in no shape to begin this 300 million kilometer journey home. So Hayabusa actually stayed at the asteroid for an additional year, sorry. And in January 2007, the team back home on Earth had finally come up with enough workarounds of all of these mechanical failures and bad luck to nurse the spacecraft back to health, point its solar panels in the right direction, build up enough power that it could close the sample in its return capsule and begin the journey home on just 2 ion engines. So in April 2007, Hayabusa began his journey home. In November 2009, another ion engine was lost. So we're down to 1 out of 4 fully functioning engines. And this is actually the moment when the people who worked on the mission say they were the most afraid that it would not succeed, because they've managed to use solar pressure on the solar panels to work to get attitude control, and they've managed to use the remaining engines and the remaining batteries to get this far. But with only 1 engine, they cannot complete the maneuvers that they have to make to get the spacecraft pointed in the right direction to actually re-enter Earth's atmosphere and deliver the samples. But incredibly, the team had prepared for this, and they had this crazy backup plan where they were able to use 2 of the partially broken engines to cobble them together and work together to basically get back up to power of 2 engines and finish the journey home. June 13th, another 13th, but a very lucky one, June 13th of 2010, Hayabusa returned home. This is the mother spacecraft, the whole spacecraft, re-entering the atmosphere over Australia. The mother spacecraft burnt up, but the sample capsule returned safely. And this is not trivial. This is the Genesis sample capsule from the NASA Solar Wind Collection mission in 2004. Genesis's parachute did not open, and it crashed and splattered its solar wind samples all over the Utah desert. But Hayabusa did not have that misfortune, at least. And the samples were brought back to JAXA. So this is another harrowing moment. We don't actually know if we collected any samples. And this is another really wonderful story that the scientists who were involved in this tell. They'd spent literally years building a curation facility for these samples, practicing what it would be like to open the sample capsule and bring these samples out and make the first measurements. And this is what they saw when they opened it. Does anyone see any samples in there? Rocks? Dust? They did actually realize this is the capsule that they were going to fill on the first landing. And they did see a few tiny particles inside. So now it's time to try to figure out how do we get out tiny dust grains from this big metal container. And they tried, high precision grain pickers. That didn't work. They had a special Teflon spatula that they made to try to scoop out samples, and they kind of scraped the side of the container, and they did get some particles out, some little dust grains. But they actually scraped off more aluminum from the inside of the container than they got grains. So they were like, well, we can't do that. So they turned to a highly technical sample extraction method that you're probably familiar with if you've worked with a car or any kind of electronic equipment, or if you're the Russian cosmonaut in Armageddon. They turned the sample capsule upside down and tapped on the back with a screwdriver. And using this very technical method, they were actually able to extract about 1,500 tiny particles the size of the width of a human hair. So this is incredible. These are the first samples ever returned from an asteroid. There's been incredible science that has come out of this mission. Even with just 1,500 particles, scientists have been able to study space weathering, what happens to dust when it's sitting on the surface of an airless body exposed to radiation. They've been able to backtrack and understand the thermal metamorphism history of the parent body. They can study grain motion even, learn about landslides on the surface of Itokawa. And most importantly, they were able to make a direct link between asteroids and meteorites, which are space rocks that fall to Earth. And we can measure meteorites and we can look at asteroids with telescopes, but no one's ever been able to directly link asteroids to the meteorites they're related to. So for the first time, Hayabusa was able to do that. So Hayabusa was a triumph for scientists, but it's also one of the greatest stories of robotic space exploration that I know of. It brought back 1,500 of these precious particles from another body. It created this direct link between asteroids and meteorites. And it demonstrated that sample return from a planetary surface beyond the moon is possible. So I put all these pictures up here because I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker for YouTube videos of control rooms and returning astronauts. And I think the reason for that is that these experiences where large numbers of people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people come together and work towards something that seems impossible, but ultimately is achieved, is one of the most moving things that we can experience as humans. And space exploration gives us that experience every time. So this is a talk about Hayabusa. And Hayabusa was challenged, but it was successful. So what's next? Of course, we're going to do it again. So JAXA has another mission. It's called Hayabusa 2. It's going to go to another asteroid and bring back more samples. This is a C-type asteroid, which is a carbon-rich asteroid that may tell us about the history of Earth's water, or maybe even the history of life. And Hayabusa 2 will be arriving at its asteroid Ryugu this summer, and it'll be collecting samples in the next year. So follow Hayabusa 2 on Twitter and stay tuned for sure. And that is all I have for you, so thanks so much.
I believe that floor is open for questions. Let's go back in the back yonder there.
Hey, sweet talk.
Thanks.
So in our phone we have like accelerometer, gyroscope, all that stuff. And you mentioned that they didn't really know if the satellite was kind of tipped over on its side. Are there special, are there ways to do those instruments far differently, since you're in space and you kind of don't have the earthly elements to give you that info?
Yeah, a great question. So one potential issue is that the gravity on an asteroid like this is so low, and it may not necessarily be pointing directly down. So if you're measuring the acceleration due to gravity, you may get confused. Another potential issue is that you have very limited ability to contact the spacecraft and to get data back. So you may not be able to take advantage of whatever data you are collecting at the time. As for other methods that you could do that, can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are some.
Thanks.
Is the communication rate measured in baud? How many nerds get this? Like old modem talk, like 8,000 baud.
Millibauds, microbauds.
God, I hope not. Next question. That was a joke, I'm sorry. Next question. Selena, or the other person over there first.
Over here?
And then we'll go to Selena.
I guess this makes JAXA one of the leaders in the lead up to asteroid mining. It puts them in a good position. Is anybody else been landing on asteroids, or what's the lineup? What's the roadmap for that sort of industry?
Yeah, great question. So JAXA is definitely the leader. We did it first, and we're doing sample return from small bodies the most. Other than Hayabusa 2, we're also planning a sample return mission to the moons of Mars, and there are some other really great small body missions planned as well. But we're not the only ones. So NASA has the OSIRIS-REx mission, which is super complementary to Hayabusa 2. It's going to another C-type asteroid, so it'll really allow us to understand the variation in bodies of this type. And I don't know if there are any other space agencies planning sample return missions from small bodies right now. Oh, of course. Well, landing, but not samples.
Maybe they
Yeah. Caesar, of course. So Rosetta is a mission that went to a comet and studied it. And NASA's now got a great mission planned to actually go back and bring back samples from that same comet.
Selena?
So you mentioned that Hayabusa had broke pretty soon in the mission. You were like, oh, that kind of sucks.
Yep.
How is there a point where you're like, ooh, this broke really soon, so let's bring it back while it's still relatively close? And like, what's that barrier that you're like, oh, let's rein this one in and redo some stuff and then send it out again?
Most missions, that is not possible because once you're launched, you're gone. You cannot come back and generally land safely on Earth and be repaired and be launched again. You might as well just send a new mission. One mission that I kind of wanted to talk about for this talk but didn't have time, where that sort of happened, or it was lucky that they didn't leave Earth orbit so they could do it, is the Hubble Space Telescope. So, of course, this is an incredible telescope. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of, galaxies and all kinds of incredible things. But when they actually launched the Hubble Space Telescope into orbit the first time, it was out of focus. So there had been some issues in, some of the testing and design of the mirrors, and the Hubble was out of focus in Earth orbit. So they couldn't do the science that they planned to do. But luckily, we had the space shuttle at that time, and they had actually launched the Hubble with plans to service it throughout its life. So they were able to send astronauts up and repair it, and it's been an incredible mission since.
That's right here. We'll come here. We'll come next.
I had heard that some asteroids are rich in elements that are very rare on the Earth, and I'm wondering why that might be the case, and then also, did they see any evidence of that in the samples that came back?
Yeah, so a couple different reasons why that might be the case. Basically, the asteroids and the Earth are made of the same stuff, but in the Earth, you have taken this general mixed bag of elements, and you've concentrated things like metals into the core. So they've mostly been removed from our ability to access them. This has also happened in some larger asteroids, and some of the most promising asteroids probably for mining are basically remnant cores of small planets. So you have just like a giant ball of metal. There aren't very many of those. Other asteroids may be somewhat richer in certain elements or materials of interest than like a typical Earth rock. Because they haven't had any bits, they haven't experienced core separation, so they haven't had any bits concentrated out of our reach. But, I mean, I'm a little skeptical about that because we have another advantage on Earth, which is processes like aqueous alteration that tend to concentrate things like ores in cracks in rocks and whatnot, and that doesn't happen on many asteroids. So the type of asteroid that Itokawa was is basically just like a ball of silicate rock. So not super exciting. I mean, it's very exciting, but if you're a miner, I would say it's probably not your favorite place.
Oh, question back there?
Hi, so when they found out that Hubble had a spherical aberration in its main mirror, that was like a major PR disaster for NASA, and a lot of people questioned how much we should be funding space, and it affected the public's perceptions of science. So I was wondering, with Hayabusa, did you see any changes in the Japanese government willing to support JAXA, or did that affect the public perception of science at all?
You just made movies.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be a Hollywood movie. I mean,
So there are actually probably better people to answer that question in this room than me. But I do know that Hayabusa became incredibly popular with the public because it's kind of this underdog story that we can all get behind. And when Hayabusa finally succeeded, everyone was really, really excited. Do you have a comment?
if Hubble had had a mascot like this, it would not have been a PR disaster.
This really helps. There are some really incredible cartoons and drawings that I've seen from Hayabusa's return. Hayabusa means falcon in Japanese, and so there are some incredible cartoons of Hayabusa as this falcon with all of these band-aids on it, saying, you know, I did my best, I'm coming home. Like, it's really, really heart-wrenching.
Okay, one more over there and then back over here.
And we'll go over here for a second. Hi, so we are very proud of Rosetta mission, and that's the only mission
impact.
Funding-wise and the public-wise?
Good question. I don't think I know the answer to that. Any other space scientists in here have a comment?
I would argue it's too early to tell. Because I don't know what to get you. But just from like a space policy perspective, was there a difference in allocation?
More loudly, please, if you want to talk to everyone.
So I know that getting funding for Hayabusa 2 was challenging, but mainly because it's a replica of Hayabusa 1. So they had to fight very hard to say, look, a second mission really is needed. We can learn something completely new from Hayabusa 2. And of course, fend off the competition for that kind of funding. But beyond that, it seems to be very popular so far. Hopefully not movie popular, because that would mean we probably went through something similar.
There's a few over here.
Yep.
Just out of interest, was there any, let's say, side research next to the material collection? Meaning, on an, let's say, normal space mission, you would take, for example, organic material with you. That could be plants, that could be very small animals, like an insect. And then you would see what the impact is of the environment, because I looked at the timeline, and spent quite a time there, so could have been possible to collect more information about that, and that would have been a very nice argument to launch a second mission if you would have wanted to extend that. But I don't know, and that's the second question, how long would it be possible to send it there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. So you're talking about the kinds of really neat science that they often do on like the ISS or in Earth orbit. So they didn't have that sort of side science in that respect on Hayabusa. They did have, I don't know if I would call it side science exactly, but what they did do is they had remote sensing instruments on board. So they were able to take measurements of the asteroid, study its particle size distribution, processes on its surface, its composition, and so on, before they brought the samples back. So this allowed us to kind of get some really great science out of it, even if the sample collection had failed. But I think that this is sort of a philosophical question about what you want to do with your money. So you can have really amazing broad missions, and you can do really interesting things in space. But just based on looking at missions like Hayabusa and Hayabusa 2, what JAXA has tended to do is to be really focused, like razor focused in what they want to do. The primary goal of the mission was to return samples, and everything on that spacecraft was directed at returning samples. Although they did have people's names and signatures in with that a reflector that they dropped on the surface. So, you know, there's some fun stuff as well.
Last question. Gray and red.
Thank you for a great presentation. I had a question. You mentioned that the communication takes about 30 minutes. So I know like older probes have very I forgot what the one the probe that watched Shoemaker-Levy crash into Jupiter only had like 2 Apple IIs worth of computing power. Like what are they up to nowadays? And we have self-driving cars now on Earth. Like at what point will we have self-exploring? Like how far along are we, or how far away is that kind of technology for space exploration?
Adding on to that really fast, I had this exact same question. How much are the turbo nerds, that's the word, how much are the turbo nerds at JAXA who are working on Hayabusa 2 and working on the tech side of things, like saying, oh, this is so much better than Hayabusa 1? Like, how crazy are they about that?
So to answer that one first, like Elizabeth said, I think Hayabusa 2, probably in most of its computing power as well, is basically a copy of Hayabusa 1. But there's a reason for this. There's a reason we do this in space. And there's a reason, space technology, especially as far as like storage and computing and electronics, doesn't advance as fast as it does on Earth because of the environment. So because of this lack of an atmosphere, the radiation especially, you don't launch things to space unless you're really sure that they can withstand, that they're hardened against these kind of dangerous conditions. And it takes a long time to qualify things. So, different space agencies and different missions have different risk assessments and how much they're willing to just send it up and see what happens. But you don't want to do that with your large flagship missions for the most part. So computing in space probably lags behind computing on Earth by quite a bit. That being said, like I said, Hayabusa was basically independent in its descent, sample collection, and takeoff. And many spacecraft, many missions have quite a lot of independent maneuverability and decision-making capability. This is something that people are really interested in today, especially for like rovers and hoppers on planetary surfaces. Deciding where you want to go and if it's safe to go there is a big field.
I know everyone has
I think,
more questions,
yeah, we're
but
going to have to cut it out here, aren't
we're
we?
a little over, and some people probably need to go into their trains.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're going to call it here, yeah.
Hang out here with us after we wrap up.
So let's say big thank you to Sarah for an awesome talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And as someone who stays around to clean up, I have one request. Bust your tables.
Yeah, please, we have trash cans back in the corner.
Recyclable containers.
All the things are over there. You can put them wherever you want. Don't do that. Put them in the trash can. Next Nerd Night is May 11th. It is a Friday because it's always a Friday, every single time. Come see us. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. If you want to be a speaker, come talk to one of us. Thank you for coming, and good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Albéric didn't get a drawing for this talk. Apparently it's harder to translate linguistics into art. But you're also not as creative as a 6-year-old. Like, she sees connections and patterns that I'm trained.
My number one request for you is switching the slides. Don't close Nerd Night slides.
Okay.
Because then they're not open in the background when we have to switch back.
So how do you background thing? Like, so background, how do you switch? Is it Command Tab?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Or you can just minimize it. So then it's still open, because I have to go back and like open it up again each time.
Yeah. So that was because when I push the PowerPoint thing on the bottom, what comes up? I don't get a nice little menu that I can choose.
You scroll to the top.
Okay.
Or to those of you watching on stream, you cannot see anything right now, but we're very sorry about the sound difficulties. We'll see you next time, May 11th. We will be streaming or not. It really depends on how we feel that day.